We're learning Mishna is Nazir, Parak Vav, Chapter 6, Mishna Vav, Mishnah 6. So, Tagalachas HaTuma Ketzad, the haircutting process of Tuma, how does it happen? Meaning, as we've mentioned, the Torah tells us that if a Nazir becomes Tameh through a dead body, he has to basically start over again. And part of his starting over again is going to be that he has to shave off all his hair. So the whole process is called the Tiglachas, the haircutting. But it really means the whole process of what a Nazir goes through when it comes to becoming Tameh and then restarting his Naziris. What's the procedure? So Tiglachas Hatuma Ketzad. What is the procedure for the Nazir who became Tameh and has to start all over again? So we have to remember the first thing is that this all started because he became Tameh through a dead body. So how do you become tar from a dead body? What do you need to do? What do you need? How does a person become tar from a dead body? Paraduma, right? The paraduma water. So says the Mishnah, he would be sprinkled with the mei chatas, with the paraduma water, the third day after his becoming impure and the seventh day. Okay, that is what would be the first step. What follows that is, besides going through the hair cutting, he then, after going through being sprinkled, besides going through the being sprinkled on the seventh day, for becoming tar from the dead body, he has to go to the mikveh. Right, that's part of the becoming pure. You then have to wait to nightfall, because you don't completely become pure until the day is over. So the seventh day, you've done everything that you need to become pure again from the contamination, from the tumor of the dead body, but you have to wait until the next day to become completely tahar. So the Mishnah again says, he was sprinkled on day 3 and day 7, and he goes to the mikveh, and he has his hair cut on the 7th day, and he brings his karbanos on day 8. So day 7 is when he goes through the process of the paraduma water. He goes to the mikveh. He gets his hair cut, which is something that he can now do. But his karbanos, the sacrifices, he has to wait for the next day. Because to become completely pure, you have to wait for the end of the day. And then the next day, you can go and bring your karbanos. Now, says the Mishnah, V'megilach b'shmini. That didn't cut his hair on day 7. He cut his hair on day 8. He was supposed to have cut his hair on day 7. And day 8, he's supposed to just bring his sacrifices. Mm-hmm. And the sacrifices then allow him to now restart the process of the Naziris. He has to have his hair cut also. Now the Mishnah said his hair was supposed to be cut on the 7th day. What if his hair was cut on the 8th day? Nonetheless, we have a kabbalah by Bayayim. He can bring his sacrifices that day. Basically, the hair cutting doesn't push off the kabbanas for an extra day. The hair cutting was supposed to be done on day 7, but if it's done on day 8, you're already pure, and since you're already pure, you can bring the karbanas on that same day. Di Rabbi Akiva, these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Omar loy Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon said to Rabbi Akiva, Ma bein zel metzora. What's the difference between this Nazir who became impure and has to go through the purification process and restart his Naziris to a metzora, to a person who was stricken with saras? Now, what that means is like this. The halacha is that if, let's say, the halacha is that a metzora undergoes he had saras, he became tameh. The physical signs of the saras have gone away. This now allows him to go through the process of purification. So metzora undergoes a 7-day purification procedure. Okay, he has to go through 7 days. Then he has to go to the mikveh, at the end of which he must shave all his body hair. That's what he has to do. At the end of those 7 days, he has to shave off all his body hair, and that's part of the process. Now, the halacha by a metzora is that if, let's say, he delays shaving his body until the 8th day of his purification process, he waited a day. He may not bring his offerings until day 9. He must wait until the day after he shaves to bring his offerings. And the question is, what's the difference? By the Nazir Tameh, we say that even if he shaves his head on day 8, he can still bring the sacrifice on day 8. while a Mitzvah who's supposed to shave his entire body on day 7, goes to the mikveh, shaves his entire body, and then the next day day 8, he's supposed to bring his sacrifices. If he shaves his body on day 8, he can't bring his sacrifices until day 9. So what is the difference, says Reb Tarf and Rabbi Akiva, between the Nazir, who you say can have his hair cut on the 8th day and bring his sacrifices, and the Metzora, who if he has his body shaved on day 8, can only bring his sacrifices on day 9. And again, day 9, the sacrifices are what completely finishes the entire process. Omar Eloi, so Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Tarfon the following: Zeh taharasai teluya b'yamav. This one, referring to the Nazir became Tamei, his purification is dependent on days. Umetzayra taharasai teluya b'tiglachtoi. While the person stricken with saras, his purity is dependent on his shaving his body. Carbon, and he cannot bring a carbon elim kein hayama'irav shemesh until that day that his hair was cut ended. What that means is like this: when you are dealing with a Nazir Tamei, once he goes through the process of being sprinkled with the paraduma water on day 3 and day 7, and he goes to the mikveh, he is essentially pure. That's what he is. Now, before he brings his sacrifices, he is also supposed to cut his hair. Now, the cutting of his hair is not what makes him pure or impure. That has no bearing on being pure or impure. And what makes the difference about being pure or impure for the Nazir Mitzvah is, did he get sprinkled with the paraduma water on day 3 and day 7? Did he go to the mikveh? If he did, he is pure. And once he is pure, that meaning he's gone through the purification process, he has to wait to the end of that day, day 7, when he got sprinkled and he went to the mikveh. He waits end of that day, and at that point he could bring his sacrifices. The only reason he couldn't bring his sacrifice was because he was impure. And therefore, if after day 7 and the night afterwards he went through that and everything's fine, he is pure. Go in and bring your karbanos. Oh, but he has to cut his hair. All right, make sure you cut your hair too. But that's not what makes the difference as to whether he can bring the sacrifices or not. The sacrifices are brought when he becomes pure, from becoming tamei and pure from a dead body. Is that accomplished at the end of day 7 with the night after? The answer is yes, it is. So go bring your karbanos. You didn't cut your hair? Go cut your hair first. But that's not going to stop you from bringing the karban, the sacrifice on day 8. However, when you're dealing with the person stricken with saras, for him, the body shaving that he goes through is what makes the difference of his purification. This mitzvah is not being purified from dead body contamination. He's being purified from saras contamination, from the disease of saras contamination. That contamination can only end with his body shaving. His body shaving is part of the purification process. And until that happens, he does not become pure. And therefore, the day that he cuts his hair is the day that his purification process, shaves his body rather, his body is shaved, that is the day that the purification process is over, is done. Well, anytime you go through a purification process and it's done, you still got to wait for the next day to become completely pure. And therefore, the next day of being shaved, that is when he brings his sacrifices. So in the case, because that's when he becomes pure. Therefore, if the Metzora did not have his body shaved on day 7, but on day 8, that means what day did he become purified from his saras impurity? Day 8. And if it's day 8, so now he has to wait for the next day to bring his sacrifices, which is why he can only bring them on day 9. That is how Rabbi Akiva answered the difference. The basic difference boils down to the fact that the Nazir who was tamei from a dead body is essentially finished his purification process with being sprinkled and with going to the mikveh, even without cutting his hair. And therefore, the next day he can bring his sacrifices, but he has to cut his hair too before that. But that has no bearing on his purification. While by the person who is stricken with saras, the body shaving is part of his purification process. He cannot become completely purified until he cuts his hair. And therefore, since the cutting of the hair is what completes his purification process, like any other time, you got to wait for the next day to bring your sacrifices. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
The one that is the Nazir